Okay, good evening everyone. It is the 25th of October 2013. It's 7 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the States, and you're watching Trolling with Logic on our new home at Google Hangouts. We hope you like it. We hope it's tech glitch free when all our fingers and extremities are crossed for what's about to come. So without further ado, like I say, we're a live kind of weekly skeptic / secular show covering all kinds of really interesting subjects. Just very quick announcements. You can call in at any time, add the Skype contact Trolling with Logic to your Skype, send a little PM with a general gist of your question, and we'll add you in due course. Also, when you call in, you do grant us permission to use your likeness when we upload the shows later. So again, no funny stuff with DMCAs or that. And another copyright disclaimer is all these shows are they are public domain, and so feel free to copy and redistribute them at will. So without further ado, I'll introduce my lovely panel tonight and welcoming back Kitch.
Hey guys.
Marty.
Hi everyone.
And Sheila. Welcome to the show, our newbie Sheila.
Thanks, Cal. Hey everyone.
Okay, and I suppose, well, we did a wee practice of this off air, so can our guest, you can introduce yourself. So introducing Mr. Rob Sheaffer.
Yes. I've been a skeptic for pretty much most all of my life. I was a skeptic before there were skeptic groups. I went to Northwestern, and that was where J. Allen Hynek was professor of astronomy. He, of course, was the scientific consultant for Project Blue Book for the U.S. Air Force. And so he, I guess, had been or seemed to have been a skeptic years earlier, but by the time I got there, he was very much on the believer side and thinking that there was, you know, that the eyewitness cases were so strong that it couldn't be, you know, cast aside. And, well, I had a little different interpretation, but of course I was just a student. But I did get to know Philip J. Klass, who was at that time the best known of UFO skeptics, and probably certainly has been of all time. He wrote like 6 books on the subject. UFOs Explained is the one I'd recommend first to read of the books of Philip J. Klass. And 3 years after that, then CSICOP was formed, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which has now been shortened to CSI, so they can confuse it with crime scene investigators and also with the Church of Scientology International, another CSI. This CSI is the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And they've been publishing the Skeptical Inquirer since 1977. I joined the group just a short time after it was formed, and I've been writing a column in the Skeptical Inquirer called Psychic Vibrations, and still continue to write it for each issue. I have made a book now of some of the older columns that I've written. So if you look on Amazon.com, you'll find my book, Psychic Vibrations, is on there. You can order it, paperback. And also it's I believe it's in all the electronic formats. If you go to JREF, the James Randi Educational Foundation, they have my Psychic Vibrations book as an e-book that you can purchase for not very much. And so I've been, and lately, then I started my website, which is debunker.com, and then after that, I now have a blog, which I try to keep up to date, badufos.com, and so now it's sort of that the debunker is more like an archive for some of the older material and the classic cases and the things like Travis Walton and you know, the ones from the years past, whereas the more up-to-date, the recent developments are on badufos.com, and you can stay up to date more or less with what's happening by reading that.
We'll take one question, Rob. Do you find very much kind of the UFO sightings and all that, it's very tied into what's in the popular media at the time? Because I remember, like, when I was in high school, the X-Files was very popular, and the papers were full of UFO sightings, and it seems to have kind of declined in recent years. I mean, is that very much what you seem to find?
Well, there's definitely an influence of the mass media, but it's not just as simple as you add up the number of hours of UFO coverage and UFO TV, and that will tell you how many sightings there's going to be. It's a complicated thing. It has to do with news, and it has the news cycle and what people are thinking. For example, back in the 1950s, during the Cold War, we had a number of big UFO sightings waves, they were called. One of the biggest was in 1957, in the fall of the year, and what had happened was Sputnik was launched in October of 1957. And then all of a sudden, people started seeing all kinds of UFOs. Now, they were not seeing Sputnik because it was not something that was that easy to see. They heard about Sputnik, and they went out to look at the sky, and then they would see an airplane or a meteor or something like that and say, oh my gosh, there goes one of those UFOs. So you see, it's not a simple thing. It depends on what people have in their minds at the time. Certain cases seem to take on an almost mythic status, you know, and it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what facts are discovered. It's almost like religion, you know, in the sense that, you know, we now know that the books of the Bible were put together from, you know, in a rather, should we say, non-celestial way from different sources, and different versions of them, and some of these, you know, contradict each other in what they say. We know this now, so, you know, we don't see it as a, you know, something that's singular and, you know, holy. But the thing is, you know, UFO stories get patched together in the very same way. The more they get told over and over again, each time they get told, it's like a fish. You know, if you ever had an uncle who was a fisherman and said, oh, I caught a fish that was this big 20 years ago, and then each time he would tell the story, his hands would get a little further apart and the fish would get a little bit bigger and a little bit more amazing. And that's basically what happens with classic UFO stories. They change so much over time with the retelling and with the feedback that if you look at often the original story that these people are telling, and compare it to the story that you're hearing now, you'll be amazed at how much it's changed.
I'll go to one of the panel. Marty, do you have a question? I can see you kind of nodding and looking a bit inquisitive there.
Yeah, no, I'm just nodding along here, but I've done some UFO debunkings myself, and obviously what we hear all the time is video footage. Is that something you spend any time looking at, you know, determining, you know, how was this made or stuff like that?
I've looked at a number of these, but I'm not an expert on video, especially digital video. So I'm really not the one to ask for the technical details. But there are several people who are quite good at that. And in fact, this fellow Mark D'Antonio, who is a MUFON photo analyst, he is a believer in UFOs, and he thinks that extraterrestrials are here. But because he is a professional in the field of video, special effects, and photography, he basically hasn't found. People send in all kinds of supposed videos for analysis, and he hasn't found any of them that it seems to be authentic. So yes, it's easy to make videos these days, and in fact, as far as still pictures, I have on my blog an entry about these apps you can get on your phone now for Android or for iPhones that will insert UFOs and aliens and things like that in your pictures. And I think similar things exist for video, because I mean, people with video special effects, the software and the equipment can drum up almost anything. So yes, there are a lot of claimed videos, but none of them seem to stand up to analysis.
No, I agree with that. I looked at some. There was one in London that was captured by several people in I think it was 2011 or something like that. Now I looked at it and I could just okay, here's how they did that, and here's, you know, I could spot the, I know what effects were used, so it was really obvious how they faked it, and of course there were several people who were in on it faking the same thing, so that's how they got it from multiple angles. But I mean, people go to pretty great lengths, it seems, because some of those special effects take a lot of time to make, and do you have any idea what the point of this is? Is it people just looking for a laugh when people say, "Oh, this is real," or are they?
Yeah, I think you may be there. That's the best explanation I can think of when I look at some of these. I mean, now it's true some of these didn't take more than 15 minutes, or somebody takes a little bitty lens cap and ties it on a thread and hangs it on a fishing pole. And look, there's a flying saucer. These don't take, they're not so hard to do, but like you said, some of these video and other hoaxes are just enormously time-consuming and so much care. In fact, there was one, I'm trying to think of what the name of it was, that supposedly tied in from around the year 2006, there were these so-called drone UFOs. There were these spiky things that people were sending around photographs of, and they didn't see that the whole story didn't seem to touch the ground anywhere. That these supposedly came from certain people, but then when investigators tried to find these people, they couldn't actually find them. When they tried to locate where was the picture taken, they couldn't actually find that either. So, so part one of this was like somebody went to all this trouble to make a whole bunch of these spiky, spindly-looking things with big points coming out of them, supposedly UFOs, flying in the sky. And but then after that, somebody made up what purports to be like a government contractor's document on these things and how supposedly they're built by the government from extraterrestrial technology. And that thing was, I don't know, 50 pages or whatever, and it's got all these elaborate drawings. And I'm saying, somebody must have spent weeks doing this. Why? I have no idea.
And yeah, the other thing I've noticed, even like when people have faked the footage and they come out and say, yeah, I did this, it was a fake, are you still surprised how many folk still believe it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's gone on for a long time, even back in the days of Houdini and Conan Doyle. And Houdini said, I'm doing all these things with, by trickery and misdirection. And Doyle couldn't bring himself to doubt. He couldn't believe that. He would rather believe that Houdini had supernatural powers that he was using, rather than to believe, to fool people.
Yeah, because, well, there's kind of a sort of, on YouTube, there's a sort of semi-famous case. I think Kitch and Martin will be aware of this. There was a guy took, it was the World Trade Center, the Building 7, and he doctored the footage. And then, like, he left it for a few weeks, and all these conspiracy theorists, they were saying, look, this is it, this is the proof. And then even when he came out and said, look, this is a hoax, and he showed step by step how he did it, they were still clinging on to this. Because he even did something, he put a flying saucer flying out of the debris of the World Trade Center, and he also had on the side of the screen flashing up, this is a hoax. And he pointed all, and he still clung on to this.
What more could you want? This was a hoax.
I know, it was like, what more could he do to spell out that this wasn't real, and still they were clinging on to this footage. It's really quite incredible. And I think I'll hand over, Sheila, we'll let you have your first ever question.
Okay. Do you find that it's the ones that are perpetuating these hoaxes? Do you find that it's more people looking for their 15 minutes of fame? Is it just people who are wanting to stir up the conspiracy theorists, or have you noticed any sort of trend? Who's putting out the majority of these? What type of people is it?
Well, I think it's a lot of different ones, and I don't think that there's. I certainly can't give you a complete list. Now, I'm recalling what I wrote last, back in March, I think, from the UFO International UFO Congress, which was in Arizona, and this year. Ben Hansen, I believe it was, he actually gave a talk that I'm going to see if I can bring that page up to what I wrote. He tried to divide the type of, here's what he said. He said the following hoax or subtypes. Ben Hansen is a guy who is on the TV show, it is Fact or Fake on the Sci-Fi Channel. I don't know if that airs on in the UK. So he's sort of, well, he's a believer in some of these things, but he's a skeptical believer. He exposes hoaxes. So here are his hoax or subtypes based on his experience in law enforcement and also with paranormal claims. He says, number one is the clinical con artist who is charismatic and lacks conscience. Claims of persecution by federal agencies, a red flag. There is so much red tape for intelligence actions that these claims are not at all credible. So he basically says anybody who claims to be persecuted by federal or other official governmental agencies, they're a clinical con artist. And he said some of these people have narcissistic personality disorder, and the mentally disordered tend to gravitate to, quote, our field, unquote, which is, of course, UFO studies. And he says type 2 is legendizers, those who are seeking fame and or financial gain. They may have had a legitimate experience, but you can only tell the same story so many times, so they add more and more excitement each time it's told. Like I was just saying about the fish getting bigger each time that it gets told about the game. Then his number 3 is commercial campaigners, and they stage publicity stunts. They're not in it for the long haul. The hoax usually only lasts a few weeks because it damages the credibility of the UFO field and makes people dismiss legitimate cases. Well, I don't know, I'd go that far, but it certainly damages the credibility of the field. Number 4, he says, are self-amused pranksters who are motivated by the challenge of pulling it off. And number 5, he claims, and I don't agree with this, but he says the rarest type are the disinformation agents. The government changed its story on Roswell repeatedly. The 1956 documentary movie UFO was part of a debunking contingency plan. I think that sounds rather dubious. I don't think the government really cares one way or the other about UFOs and ufologists. I think all they care about is ufologists, don't bother me, stay away from me. That's all they care about. So I hope I've answered the question, because when you've asked that question, it occurred to me that I really wasn't in a position to give a detailed answer to it, but that Ben Hansen had already done so.
No, that's fine. It works. Thanks.
Right. I think, Kurt, you've been the quietest so far, so we'll let you jump in now.
Sure, I was actually just coming up with questions there just to have, just in case. I'm going to start with my first one. It might not be the right time, but assuming that we are at one stage visited by Stephen Hawking would say bad because they could be evil to just basically claim our resources. What's your opinion on whether if we did in fact come in contact with an alien life or an alien civilization, would this be good for us or would this be bad for us, or vice versa? Would it be good for them or bad for them or good for them?
Well, it's hard to know for sure. The way I would look at it would be if they are way off in the distance and we are way off in the distance and we are only talking by radio, I would think really there would be no harm to be done, because if I refer back to another blog entry that I did recently on bad UFOs, it's called "Is Interstellar Travel Preposterous?" Now, preposterous does not mean impossible, but it means so ridiculously impractical that, and it's not just for any level of technology. Even if you could, with 100% efficiency, somehow turn matter into energy and direct that energy behind you as thrust, you still would need absurdly large amounts of matter to get up anywhere near the speed of light. So I would think that In fact, if you look this up, there was NASA had some advanced ideas as far as what advanced propulsion systems and things that were being talked about in the last few years, and one of them came from a fellow, and in fact, I think it was even before that, Robert Forward, I believe was his name. Anyway, it was a proposal. If we wanted to send a probe to Alpha Centauri and get it there at some very large fraction of the speed of light, the proposal was something like this: the probe itself would weigh no more than a typical business letter. In other words, it would be approximately 1 ounce, or what is that, 28 grams or something. And we would then use this laser or something that would take 10% of the energy being generated on the Earth to send that one envelope to Alpha Centauri at near the speed of light. Now this, and I mean that's simply the mathematics is where this comes from. This is not somebody's opinion, or somebody hasn't thought of a new technology. This is assuming that you are extremely efficient in your technology. So when you start to think how much energy it would take to send an envelope, literally an envelope, to Alpha Centauri, somehow I just can't get too worried about them raising the armadas to come over here and to conquer us, or to grab our resources and send them back to Alpha Centauri. It's just not going to happen. If there were any actual interstellar travel, meaning individuals, living beings and sophisticated machinery and so on, they would have to be giant space arcs, and there have been these proposals that you can build these very giant things up in orbit and then send them at relatively slow velocities, very high velocities compared to our solar system, high velocities compared to ordinary earthly speeds, but very low velocities compared to the speed of light. And the trip would take centuries or thousands of years. So entire generations would live on and die on this artificial world. Essentially, you're building an artificial world. That's possible. I don't know how practical it is. So perhaps something like that might happen. But again, how worried would I be that somebody would have this armada of artificial worlds that have been traveling this way for 10,000 years and are just about to get here and are going to grab our resources and send them back? I just don't think so. I think once you understand how really, and there's no other word for it than preposterous, the proposal of actual physical interstellar travel is, once you understand that point, I don't think you'd be too worried about what somebody might do, come here, and so on. Now, there's still perhaps some marginal concern about infectious agents or anything like that. Maybe somebody from Alpha Centauri is sending an envelope to us, and when it gets here, we'll look at it, and maybe it will contain something that will grow and come working on our bellies or something. And I don't think anything like that is at all likely, but I'm just saying, short of something along the lines of some kind of infectious agent or something, and you could never plan that. Even if somebody tried to plan that for us, they wouldn't know enough about our biosphere to know what would grow and what wouldn't. So just it's hard for me to imagine any scenario that is scary along these lines. But if somehow somebody from somewhere else did get here, then I would be worried, at least to some extent. But I just don't see that happening.
Marty, I think I'll let you come in because it's going into physics right now.
Yeah, well, there's also the argument that can be made that anyone that did have the ability to get here wouldn't need it. I mean, it takes such a huge amount of resources to get here. If they have all those resources, why do they need to come here and steal our stuff? It just it doesn't make sense.
They might come here to explore, but not to steal it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Kirch, we'll go back to you. You said you had some questions.
Sure, but they're kind of like all over the place, so they're no way related. I'll ask this one. UFOs are typical. UFO sightings and belief in UFOs is just one of the typical lack of skepticism cases. People not really, using their head, thinking about this, thinking things through, being skeptical of what they see. Could this be a useful example in a skepticism class of using these, or would it be useful to bring in this sort of thing to a class for skepticism? Well, obviously, would a skepticism class in schools be useful, and using this as an example?
Yes, there are any number of cases that would make a really good example. TwL wrote several instances concerning like airline crews who reported near collisions with, unidentified objects that just went whizzing by, very close range, and so on. And it turned out that what they saw was some meteor that was more than 100 miles away, coming in the atmosphere, and or space debris. There's any number of cases like this. Or even more recently, we've learned about the famous Yukon UFO sighting of 1996, where a number of people in very scattered locations all saw this brilliant object that they reported as a close encounter UFO, a mothership, whatever. And it turns out it matches precisely the decay trajectory and time of a Russian rocket booster. So that's obviously what they saw, but that Russian rocket booster was like 140 kilometers from where they were, and but their mind filled in the details of UFO windows and things like this. So yes, things like this I think make very good examples that for classes to teach skepticism, workshops, and things. But having said that, I think it'll do any good. I think that people will see this, and we've all heard the stories of psychics or magicians actually who will go on a TV show and will talk, will show some tricks, and then say, "Well, I fooled you. I'm a magician. These are just tricks," and don't believe that when you see things like this. And then they still have people contacting them afterwards who saw the show. They say, "I saw you on this TV show. How much do you charge for a reading?" I was like, "Didn't you see the part where I said I'm a phony?" It's just, on the one hand, yes, this is something that should be done. On the other hand, it's probably not going to do a lot of good.
I think we'll go to Sheila.
Do you suppose that's because people just they really want to believe it's true?
Well, clearly that's part of it. Because really the world is a much more interesting place if all this crazy stuff is true. If it's much more interesting to think that there's creatures from Zeta Reticuli zipping around in the sky and landing in the woods in New Hampshire than it is to think, oh, it's just a planet, it's just a meteor or whatever. And it's a whole different, world. One case, you're walking out there in the woods and you think, well, maybe, I'll see a brown squirrel, or maybe I'll even see a moose. And on the other hand, maybe I'll see a flying saucer. Maybe I'll see an alien land, which is more exciting. Maybe I'll see Bigfoot.
Okay, we have a question from the chat room. What do you think about the claims about ancient aliens? I think I can imagine what you think.
Well, yeah.
This whole idea about aliens building the pyramids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The history. That's from the History Channel, isn't it?
I think that's what history is. Aliens. I thought it was Napoleon and things like that, but they think it's aliens. So I guess there's a difference of opinion there. Well, yeah, ancient aliens are even more dubious than the modern claims. They take something that looks a little bit odd, interpreted in a modern sense by modern people who aren't familiar with that culture and with the way that culture did things. They say, well, aliens must have done this. John Bannikin started that back in, I think even in the 60s and late 60s, early 70s, and then wrote any number of books, and then it's just it went dead for a while, and I thought, oh, ancient aliens, nobody believes that anymore. That was in the 80s and the 90s. You never heard any more about ancient aliens, or ancient astronauts, as they were then called. And then it started to come back again. So you never. Yeah, it happened with Bigfoot. Bigfoot kind of went away for about 15 or 20 years, and nobody was seeing him, nobody cared about him. And No, Bigfoot is, oh man, he's a celebrity. He's a man around town, you know.
Yeah, I think we have Zechariah Sitchin to thank for a lot of the ancient alien claims nowadays. That his stuff got really popular around the whole, when the 2012 nonsense got started. That's when we really saw a rise in the popularity of these claims, I think.
Was one question that kind of fed off all that, Rob, is what do you make of like the History Channel, which kind of started out as kind of fairly legitimate, and it's now just seems to have gone to, I don't know how to describe it.
No. Well, what can we say? What do they say? Gresham's law or something is bad currency drives out the good or something, and maybe that applies to television also. Yeah. It's not just the History Channel. It's happening all over. There used to be, the Arts and Entertainment channel used to be literally arts and entertainment. You have classical music and dance and things like that, and concerts on it, and now it has nothing of the kind, and it's got, some entertainment shows and some just far out stuff. And History Channel, as you said, it used to talk about the Second World War and Napoleon and, ancient Rome, and now it talks about ancient aliens. The True TV, I think it used to be Court TV, as I recall. That used to be, if you turned into Court TV, you would have you would see actual courtroom video of things like the famous trials, the OJ trial, and so on. And now it's still sort of crime-related, a lot of it, but it's more like, true police tales, true detective tales, whatever. So it seems to be a whole general trend in television. People want more sensationalism. They don't want this the arts and entertainment and having a fine concert on by, an opera singer or something. That's not what people want to do. They want to have, something that's, and it appeals to more of a common denominator.
Yeah. Yeah. Another problem is that there's no money in telling the truth.
Yes, right.
The money is in telling people what they want to hear. So they don't care. As soon as they realize that you make more money if you show absolute bullshit that people like, that's what you'll show.
Yes. And we see that in so many different things. Sometimes skeptics say, well, we've got to do a skeptical show and, put this in there. And I say, if you really did a show that was completely fair and showed all of the skeptical reasoning and explanations for these UFOs, nobody would watch it.
Exactly.
They would say, "Oh, this is BS. This is debunking. This must be government paid disinformation." And any number of people claim that I'm paid by the government to debunk these. Robert Hastings, who's well known in American ufology, as a guy who talks about the nuclear missiles and supposedly UFOs knock out nuclear missiles, and or they take them offline for a little while. And he's convinced, he wrote some things saying that I and the other people of the PsyCop, now CSI, are in cahoots, being paid by the government to debunk these things. Well, I wish I were, then I wouldn't be driving such an old car. If the CIA would, get up their ass and send me some money, but.
Yeah. Who's got a question next? Anyone? Well, there was something I did want to ask. Do you find that kind of the UFO believers, like kind of out of all the, sort of believers in kind of the pseudosciences, are they sort of, I don't know how to put this, like, they react more favorably, they at least try and engage with the debunkers, like, because like my experience was, say, like a 9/11 truther, they're very vitriolic, their defenses are up, and they attack you straight away. Whereas, like my impression, at least with the UFO folk, they do seem to try and engage the debunkers a little bit more.
Well, I would say it would depend on the group. Again, it's difficult to generalize. There's some of them who are reasonable and friendly and not too vitriolic, and you can sit down with them and discuss, and you can disagree or try to make your point, and they'll make their point. But that hasn't been the main experience of ufology for these things. When Phil Klass was alive and when he was active in ufology, they never, several of the well-known ufologists, Alan Hynek and Bud Hopkins and many, many others, they basically had a policy that they would not go on any TV show or panel or anything if Phil Klass was going to be on there, because he was too well prepared and would make them look foolish. And really, many of these people take an absolutist position. There's no other way to describe it. For example, the late Bud Hopkins was certainly an absolutist in that he was right and you were simply wrong. There was no point in even discussing it. If you didn't understand what he was saying, it meant you were stupid. And, you know, we still encounter this attitude sometimes. Now, some of them are, you know, more reasonable than that. Also, it's, as I said in a paper I did in the Skeptical Inquirer a few years back, trying to do like a sort of a historical look back at 60 years of UFO claims. Roughly speaking, the UFO movement, the UFO proponents, divide into two camps. One is like the science fiction camp, and these are probably the ones that maybe you're more familiar with, the ones who are claiming that, you know, the extraterrestrials are here and they've built rockets or they have some high technology, and it's, you know, it's the kind of thing you might read in a science fiction story. Whereas there's others that call the New Age type, and to them it's really different. It's they have like a personal relationship with the aliens, and it's a much more religious and spiritual thing with these New Age people. And they're not so interested in sightings. I mean, if you tell them you had a sighting, oh, that's good. Oh, you saw them too. You know, I saw them 3 times last week. They're not that keen on the sightings. They are either channeling or in some way, you know, having a conversation, or they may meet with the aliens, they may be abducted, and all kinds of things. And they have their stories become just so elaborate as they start telling them. It's almost like they don't get somebody to listen to their story very often. And so when there's a person, or better yet, a group of people, like they say at a UFO meeting, you get a chance to tell their story. They just go into all the little details, and the aliens said this, and our planet is this, and we're here because you're destroying your planet with pollution and radiation and whatever and whatever. And it's often, and then it all ties in with psychic stuff, because they claim, you know, telepathic communication, psychic powers. So it's this New Age thing is really very different than the science fiction types. And it's a whole different role that it plays in people's lives.
Marty, I think I'll let you, because you've had experience with the New Age UFOs. Big experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a positive experience. Yeah, these are the people who claim that the Illuminati is made up of Mars, and Jews come from space, apparently. And it's,
what comes from space? I didn't hear that.
Jews.
Oh,
the Hebrews come from space. They're aliens, apparently. I don't know if there's some anti-Semitism involved there or whatever. But it's just, yeah, it's so ridiculous. It's just you want to laugh your ass off until you realize that this guy actually believes this.
Yes, and he votes. Yeah. So they, George Adamski and others talk about the Nordics, you know, tall, blonde Nordic UFO people. Nobody ever talks about, you know, short Mexican UFO people. And in fact, I've talked with a few Asians who say that, they hear this kind of talk and they say, oh, wait a minute, if those guys are the Nordics and they're good and they're tall and they're blonde, they're the good aliens, does that mean I'm bad because I'm brown?
Okay, another thing that UFO believers keep yapping on about crop circles.
Yes.
I mean, are there any unexplained ones? Because I keep hearing that all the time. I mean, we all know how they're done. The people who started it went out in public and say, here's how it's done, and then, of course, other people started doing it and making it more and more elaborate. But every now and then you keep hearing about, oh, no one can explain this one, and this one has this magical field around it that kills cameras or whatever. I mean,
we don't get so much of that on this side of the Atlantic. Those kind of crop circles aren't really common. But I was just noticing there was on the NBC television news about 2 days ago. There was a story they had. It was called Farm Tourism, and it had to do with how some of the farms in the U.S. are bringing in tourists as like around Halloween and the corn stalks and and all this and that. And one of the things that they do is they make mazes in the corn, and the farmer does this, and the people wander through and try to find their way through the maze, and then they had some aerial photos of the crops with these patterns in them. And my God, it was amazing. And some of them had written words, God bless America or something like that in the, that can only be seen from the sky. But it was really quite remarkable. And as I said, the farmers themselves did this, got some helpers to do that. So it's quite easy to make complex patterns in a crop. Now, why it's done? Well, like we said, why are these video hoaxes done? Probably for all of those reasons that we mentioned before.
And if it brings in tourism, I mean, that's a reason to do it. So
exactly.
We do have a question from Angry Wombo. She's PM me there. What is the craziest piece of UFO evidence you've ever seen? I mean, the one that's left you just completely floored and speechless.
Floored and speechless that anybody would believe it was. Well, I went on this UFO tour in Mexico. This was 1996. This was back when there was a big wave of sightings in Mexico. The claim was made that in Mexico City, the UFOs were being seen so frequently that if you just were near the airport in Mexico City, you could go there at any time and see UFOs. And, well, obviously that couldn't be true, and obviously that wasn't true, but it was claimed. And we went down there, and we went to the very places where, the most sightings had been reported. And we went to, in fact, this one guy's house. We stopped off there because he was one of the witnesses, and he wanted to show us his evidence. And he claimed that a UFO had landed in their backyard a couple nights ago, and he pointed to, there was a stick on the ground, and the stick was broken, cracked. And, it wasn't fully broken, it was bent, cracked. And he pointed to it and said, the UFO did that. I was speechless. That's the evidence.
Okay, Marty or Sheila, can you take some questions? We might have some possible callers, so I'll try and arrange them. So if you can take over the questions for a little bit.
Okay. Sure. All right. As far as I'm concerned, the odds of us being the only life form in the universe is pretty small. Does that mean I think that they visited us? No, not at all. Do you think that if there is life elsewhere, do you think it's probably likely that it's evolved somewhere along the same lines that we have, or would you expect it to be somewhere further ahead, evolutionary, than we are?
Well, I'm not sure that evolution has forward and backwards, or has a start, or has a a goal. So, in the sense, I think it's a misconception to think that all the species of this planet and other planets are racing forward to a more highly evolved form, and that's really not um, how it works. People say it's the survival of the fittest, but really it's the survival of the fit enough. But I would, again, it's conjecture. And when I think about how large the universe is, if you've seen the Hubble Deep Space, that one photo, which was just this tiny little piece of sky, so tiny you could hardly even see it as a little square with your eye, and then when it's magnified, it is just thousands and thousands of galaxies as far as can be seen. And the notion that none of those galaxies out there has any planet anywhere with life on it, and or has none of them has any planet with intelligent creatures on it, I simply can't believe that. Given the size of the universe, I simply cannot believe that there isn't more that's out there. But again, we talked about the distances. We talked about how amazingly difficult it would be to send an envelope, just an envelope, to Alpha Centauri. And that, by the way, that does not involve it actually stopping, or not sufficient energy to. Oh, I guess maybe there was some way they were going to have a beam turn around or something. Or maybe they were and you stop it. I'm trying to go. No, I think they could stop it. But anyway, but the point is, you're just trying to send an envelope to Alpha Centauri, and you're putting this phenomenal amount of energy into it. So imagine if you wanted to send a spacecraft with life support for a breeding population of humans and everything they would need, and chickens and cows and pigs, who I hope will like to keep up for a few thousand years. Um, you just think of how impractical that whole thing is. I just don't expect that really to happen. So I agree with what Sheila was saying, in that the likelihood of there actually being intelligent life in the universe, I think, is extremely high. Whether they can make it here is dubious, almost beyond belief. Now, radio contact, SETI, that's possible. But again, I suspect that their intelligent beings are far enough apart and sufficiently uncommon that it's going to be very difficult to find them with radio. But still, it could possibly happen someday. And I think it's something that's worth trying, at least, on a relatively modest effort. I wouldn't spend a huge amount of money on SETI because the likelihood of it going off isn't that great. But I think it's reasonable to spend a little bit on it, just like so many other areas of scientific research, and see what you'll find.
Okay, do you have a question from Camille, who's asking, what are the top 3 reasons you feel are holding back civilization from scientific advancement?
What are the top?
The top 3 reasons that you feel...
Top 3 reasons. Well, I'm not sure if I know the top 3. There are a number of things. Part of it is simply human envy and resentment against others who have maybe made you look bad. I mean, if you and I are competing in some effort and you beat me, well, if I'm a good sport and I'm raised to be polite and fair and everything, then I'll shake your hand and so on. But a lot of people are not like that, and if you get further ahead of them and say, "Who do you think you are? You're such a you think you're so smart." We see this all the time in the schools. The bullies like to beat up on the smart kid, the skinny little kid with the glasses and the science book, and they want then and lately, then I started my website, which is debunker.com, and then after that, I now have a blog, which I try to keep up to date, badufos.com, and so now it's sort of that the debunker is more like an archive for some of the older material and the classic cases and the things like Travis Walton and you know, the ones from years past, whereas the more up-to-date, the recent developments are on badufos.com, and you can stay up to date more or less with what's happening by reading that.
We'll take one question, Rob. Do you find very much kind of the UFO sightings and all that, it's very tied into what's in the popular media at the time? Because I remember, like, when I was in high school, the X-Files was very popular and the papers were full of UFO sightings, and it seems to have kind of declined in recent years. I mean, is that very much what you seem to find?
Well, there's definitely an influence of the mass media, but it's not just as simple as you add up the number of hours of UFO coverage and UFO TV, and that will tell you how many sightings there's going to be.
Okay, good evening everyone. It is the 25th of October 2013. It's 7 p.m. in the UK, 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the States, and you're watching Trolling with Logic on our new home at Google Hangouts. We hope you like it. We hope it's tech glitch free when all our fingers and extremities are crossed for what's about to come. So without further ado, like I say, we're a live kind of weekly skeptic/secular show covering all kinds of really interesting subjects. Just very quick announcements. You can call in at any time, add the Skype contact Trolling with Logic to your Skype, send a little PM with a bit general gist to your question, and we'll add you in due course. Also, when you call in, you do grant us permission to use your likeness when we upload the shows later. So again, no funny stuff with DMCAs or that. And another copyright disclaimer is all these shows are they are public domain, so feel free to copy and redistribute them at will. So, without further ado, I'll introduce my lovely panel tonight, and welcoming back Kitch.
Hey guys.
Marty.
Hi, Rob.
And Sheila. Welcome to...
It's a complicated thing. It has to do with news, and it has the news cycle and what people are thinking. For example, back in the 1950s, during the Cold War, we had a number of big UFO sightings, waves, they were called. One of the biggest was in 1957, in the fall of the year, and what had happened was Sputnik was launched in October of 1957. Then all of a sudden, people started seeing all kinds of UFOs. Now, they were not seeing Sputnik because it was not something that was that easy to see. They heard about Sputnik, and they went out to look at the sky, and then they would see an airplane or a meteor or something like that and say, oh my gosh, there goes one of those UFOs. So you see, it's not a simple thing. It depends on what people have in their minds at times. Certain cases seem to take on an almost mythic status, you know, and it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what facts are discovered. It's almost like religion, you know, in the sense that, you know, we now know that the books of the Bible were put together from, you know, in a rather, should we say,
the show our newbie Sheila.
Thanks, Cal. Hey, everyone.
Okay, and I suppose, well, we did a wee practice of this off air, so can our guest, you can introduce yourself. So introducing Mr. Rob Sheaffer.
Yes. I've been a skeptic for pretty much most all of my life. I was a skeptic before there were skeptic groups. I went to Northwestern, and that was where Jalen Hynek was professor of astronomy. He, of course, was the scientific consultant for Project Blue Book for the U.S. Air Force. And so he, I guess, had been or seemed to have been a skeptic years earlier, but by the time I got there, he was very much on the believer side and thinking that there was, you know, that the eyewitness cases were so strong that it couldn't be, you know, cast aside. And well, I had a little different interpretation, but of course I was just a student. But I did get to know Philip Glass, who was at that time the best known of the UFO skeptics, and probably certainly has been of all time. He wrote like 6 books on the subject. UFOs Explained is the one I'd recommend first to read of the books of Philip Glass. And a few years after that, then CSICOP was formed, the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, which has now been shortened to CSI, so they can confuse it with crime scene investigators and also with the Church of Scientology International, another CSI. This CSI is the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And they've been publishing the Skeptical Inquirer since 1977. I joined the group just a short time after it was formed, and I've been writing a column in the Skeptical Inquirer called Psychic Vibrations, and still continue to write it for each issue. I have made a book now of some of the older columns that I've written. So if you look on Amazon.com, you'll find my book, Psychic Vibrations, is on there. You can order it, paperback. And also it's I believe it's in all the electronic formats. If you go to JREF, the James Randi Educational Foundation, they have my Psychic Vibrations book as an ebook that you can purchase for not very much. And so I